All right, I'm back. I don't know if that's to your enjoyment or your nightmare, but either way, you're gonna have to deal with me. Ready for class 2. So, some people have not received your kits yet. If you ordered your kit right before the class started, a lot of people did. And so we're doing our best to get those out as quick as we can. Everybody should have everything by this week. But yeah, it's we're doing our best. We got a lot of orders right around the time the class started, and that slowed us down a bit. So try and be patient. We're doing our best. You should get your stuff soon. If you haven't yet, let us know if you have any issues. Some of their cells got contaminated, media got contaminated, and we'll just send you more. No problem. Just let us know. Sound good? Driving home from work. Did you check? So you should get a FedEx tracking number with the order. If you got a FedEx tracking number, that should be. If you just got your culture and you made backup culture, I would say don't do this experiment right away. Wait for a day or two, let your backup culture grow so you know that your backup culture is good, because basically what we're doing now, this first step, the trypsin digest, you're going to destroy your culture. We're going to irreparably destroy our culture. So if you mess it up and your backup culture is not working, then we got to send you some more. So take a step, wait a day, check your culture, your backup culture tomorrow, make sure some of the cells are adhering and stuff like that, and then proceed. Or wait a few days, whatever you need. The cells are pretty robust, so they can survive a good amount of time. So try not to be in any rush with this, because it's basically, cell culture is all about patience. It's all about patience and, being a little bit anal. Keeping your work area clean, trying to be sterile and stuff like that. So make sure when you make your bag of culture and everything you do today, you're sterile and clean. Stuff like this, always good. Wipe down your work area. Good to keep around in general. So that's the first thing you always want to do before you get started. Feel free to wipe down your gloves. Get them all nice and clean. And then wipe down the area where you're going to work. Clean off your pipettes, clean off everything. It's a good practice to have in general, no matter what you're doing. I try to always, when I pick up my pipette for the first time, splash some ethanol and stuff on it. Keep it clean. You can get all kinds of crud that can ruin your experiments, and if all it takes is wiping them down to not ruin your experiments, it's not that big of a deal. Yeah. All right. So you should have your flask of cells. These cells are looking a little old. You should have your flask of cells. They should be opaque, right? I just got my heating mat, and how often should I check the mat? What do you mean, how often should you check the mat? The mat should be temperature controlled, so you shouldn't What should I do to keep my temperatures okay if I'm not at home? It should automatically, you can set the temperature on the heating mat and it should automatically adjust. You can't reuse, well, we'll go over that today a little bit about reusing filters, but yeah, so the heating mat should come with a temperature sensor. If it didn't, let us know, but it should come with a temperature sensor so that you just place the temperature sensor right on top of the heating mat or right underneath it. Tape it on. It doesn't appear to set a max temperature. Well, that's okay. Is it going really high over the temperature? Is your temperature sensor thermometer on the heating mat? What I would do is I'd stick it under the mat or tape it to the mat. Stick it right on the mat. Generally, these things will stay within a degree or two of the temperature you set, and that's plenty good. Even if it's a little bit lower, you know, low 30s, 33, 34, something like that, it's still pretty okay. The best way to make sure the temperature is closer is just to, you know, make sure that sensor is really in contact with the mat. That's it. All right. Any other questions before we begin? So yeah, today we're going to work with your culture. So get your culture out, and what we're going to do is we are going to do what they call passaging or splitting the cells. Basically what passaging and splitting the cells means is it means that that you're just removing cells that are adherent or forming colonies. You're separating them into individual cells, and then you're reseeding them somewhere else at a lower culture density. Now, what this does is it allows you to take one flask of cells and say turn it into like 5 flasks of cells or something like that, right? Generally, when you're working with cells, you want to work with cells that aren't old, cells that are actively growing. So you want to work with cells once they hit approximately, like, generally people say like 70% confluency. Confluency, remember, is just the term that means like the amount of cells growing on the surface. So when you look at it under the microscope, you don't judge it and be like, is this about 70% confluency? You don't have to be exact on this. There is, you know, it's not exact. It's just a general place to be in. When you're doing that, the cells are healthy, and they're replicating and growing, which means they're going to be really good to work with. So once they start to get older and die, or if there's not enough cells there, you're going to have a little bit of trouble performing experiments. So generally, try to grow your cells up to about 70% confluency. Now, when you're seeding cultures, obviously the more cells you add, the faster the culture is going to get to 70%. You can add too much though, but it is hard. So be wary of that. Don't add too much cells to a new culture. Usually it's mostly just because of the trypsin that we're going to work with. Trypsin, what it does, what trypsin does is it cleaves proteins. Proteins are what is helping the cells attach to the surface, right? So you're growing every culture in L15, FBS, AMP, strep, gent. So like Enki, look at the look at the guidelines and protocols on the website. Check those out on the Google Classroom. There should be some protocols and guides that will help be more clear. But yeah, L15 is media. Trypsin is not media. Trypsin is a protein, and what it does is it chops up proteins that are attached to the surface of cells. What this does is it gets the cells to detach, right? So generally what we want is we want adherent cell cultures. Now what you can do is some cells you can scrape off and stuff like that. Generally that's not the best way to start cultures, because generally what you're going to get is just a lot of clumps of cells and not cells that are completely separated, which can, spread out and start to grow. But that's something that you can do. But in general, usually with adherent cells, what you want to do is you want to use trypsin to remove the cells, get them to unbind, and then seed them in new areas. So today we're going to take the cells from our flask, and then we are going to use the tissue culture plate. Yes, there should only be a tiny drop of the calfectin reagent. Only a tiny drop. So what you're going to need today, some trypsin, some L15 media, some PBS, an empty tube, your cells, a 12-well plate, syringe and filter. All right. So this empty tube, what we're going to just do today is we're just going to use it as waste. We're going to dump out stuff in there. So, mix some bleach in there to kill the cells or whatever, but we'll use that as our waste. So the first thing you're going to want to do, now when you work with cells, understand that the cells don't like to be dry, right? It's like, imagine it's like a living tissue. If you dry out the living tissue, they're just going to die. It's just going to die. So when you're working with cells, you want to try to keep them in media as much as possible. So if you're going to remove the media or something like that, afterward, you should be ready to add media, not let it sit for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes or whatever. You want to add media directly after that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to dump out all the media in our flask. So, swirl it around a little bit to get any dead cells and just dump it into the 15 ml tube. So it's calfectin. It's not calfective. Calfectin reagent. You should have a little tube of it. If you don't, let us know and we'll send you some. All right. So we dumped out the stuff that's in our flask. Now, next what we want to do is we want to rinse out our flask. There's still probably some dead cells and other junk in there. So we're going to take a syringe, put a filter on it, and we're going to add just a few mLs of PBS. So let's just do like 4 mLs of PBS. And then we're going to sterile filter the PBS into the flask. And we're going to swirl it around. What this is going to do, it's going to help remove the dead cells and stuff that's in there. Swirl it around, get all those dead cells off. No more dead cells. Yeah. And then we're going to dump this out in there. Alright? So PBS and get all those dead cells. Swirl around good, dump it out. So once we have the PBS and we rinsed everything out, what we're going to do is we're going to add trypsin. Now, for trypsin, for one of these flasks, you're going to want to add around 1 ml of trypsin for these small flasks. For the bigger flasks, the T25, these are T12.5. T25 flasks, you're going to want to add around 3 mLs of trypsin. So what we're going to do, I put in 1 ml of trypsin. And close it up, lay it down, and now we're just going to let the trypsin sit. We're going to let the trypsin do its magic. So now, usually this can take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer. That's okay. What you're going to do is just every once in a while, you're going to pick it up and kind of swirl it. And if it looks like the cells aren't coming off, then that means that you should wait a little bit longer. So just let it sit for a little bit. Let it hang out and let the trypsin digest the proteins in the cells. Yeah, it just takes a little bit of time. What you're going to want to do before you do this is, remember, you're going to want to warm all your media up. Generally, you don't want to take your media directly out of the fridge and dump it on your cells. It'll stress and it'll shock the cells. It's not good for healthy cells. So take it out, let it sit for a little while. If you want, an easy way to warm it up is to put it on your heat mat. That'll warm it up pretty fast, and you'll get it closer to 37°C. So stick it on the heat mat, your trypsin and your L15 and your PBS, let it warm up a bit, and do that before you use it. Every time you use media, do that. It's just a good practice. Like I always say, you want to treat your cells with as much respect as you can. You want to baby them and take care of them as much as you can. And that's doing everything in your power to not subject them to like different environments than what they're living in, right? If you're constantly subjecting them to different environments, then they're just going to get stressed out. And when they're stressed out, they just don't like to function normally. So, hey. My culture seemed very yellow. Yeah, it's just an old culture. That's all. My culture looked fine though. Like, if the media starts to turn a little bit yellow, that's totally okay. It's when the media gets cloudy and yellow that it's bad. Generally, when the media starts to get a little yellow, it might also just be the lighting and the coloring of the camera. It's just the pH changing. It's just that there's a lot of cells growing in there. So you want to change your media, every few days. And few days could be anywhere from, 3 to 5. You saw some black dots. It's, you're going to have to send a picture. It's hard for me to, without seeing it, it's difficult. So take a picture of it, post it in the classroom, and let me check it out. But yeah, it's generally, when your cells are bad, it's pretty easy to, when your cells are bad. You don't really question it. You're never like, oh, I wonder if my cells are bad. No, usually it's like a pretty obvious thing. So, all right. So, I'm getting there, almost there. Give it another minute or two. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get a flask and a 12-well plate. A flask so that you can start up another flask culture, this time with the trypsin digested cells, and the 12-well plate so we can prepare for our experiment next week. So generally, when you're doing your actual experiments, you're going to do them in plates. This is because it takes less cells. You can do a lot more experiments. 12-well is, you could go smaller, you could go 24-well, but 12-well I think is like, for me, it's the smallest, it's the biggest number I'll go with, the smallest well, easiest to work with and stuff like that. So yeah, 12-well it's good. So it allows you to do 12 different experiments. That's plenty. So we got our 12-well plate right here. Should be sterile and sealed. Over your 12-well plate. So the 12-well plate has a lid, right? So try to keep the lid on at all times or as much as possible. Obviously, when you start taking the lid off, things can start to get contaminated. So try to keep the lid on. Now, these plates are not air sealed. So if you haven't been using a Tupperware container on top of your heat mat, you might want to start with the plates. The flasks are sealed a lot better than these plates, and it's easier for the plates to get contaminated. So, you know, find some Tupperware or something, wrap it up. It helps protect it from the airflow of everything that's constantly going on. You could probably also just wrap it in some aluminum foil or something. That would probably help just as well, protect it from the airflow. Yeah. Yes, scraping the bottom of the flask is just a hacky way. Sometimes cells are scraped off. There's cell scrapers and stuff that you can actually purchase to use. But generally, it's just an easy way to start a new culture without exchanging any media, right? So if somebody sends you a new culture and, you know, they're not going to send you another one, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to start a culture probably by scraping, just to make sure, to make a backup culture, just to make sure you don't contaminate anything or anything like that, right? Because if you contaminate it, your cultures are all dead, and, you know, where trypsin digest is a little more, you got to add a bunch of different medias to it, so it's a lot easier to contaminate it, which means if you don't do it right the first time, you're out of luck. So I like to be prepared, thorough. I know I make mistakes, so I like to be ready for those mistakes. So what should happen is your cells should start to all come off the flask. If they don't, what you can do is you can take a pipette tip, and instead of scraping, what you can do is you can just suck up some of the trypsin and squirt it against the flask to help dislodge any cells that are stuck on there still. You know, it's okay. You don't have to get them all. Like, this isn't like a competition or anything like that. You know, you just want to get most of them off. And then what you should have is, let's see, where's the camera? You should see, it should just be like a opaque solution. It's not focusing well on it. Where the cells are. That's what's there. All right. Are the hypo filters sterile or non-sterile? I see both for sale. It doesn't matter if you have a sterile filter or not, because the filters are sterilizing stuff. So generally, it's really rare you're ever going to need a sterile filter, right? I mean, if you really, actually, I don't know if they'll survive heating or like autoclaving, but yeah, non-sterile is totally fine because everything will hopefully get sterilized. All right. So the next step of what we want to do is we want to take our 15 mLs of media and we want to sterile filter it. So you should have a tube of L15 that's something like this. So what you can do is you can reuse your syringe and filter that you use for the PBS, right? PBS is pretty neutral. It's not going to do any harm to anything if you have a little PBS in it. You generally don't want to refilter stuff with trypsin because you don't want trypsin in your cultures. It's just, it's not something you want. So you just take the filter, take the syringe, put it in there, and just filter the media. Push it through. You probably won't get it all in one go, so add the rest of it in, filter it into your tube. Try not to touch the end of your filter to the media inside the tube. And all right, now we got sterile filtered media. So the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to add your cells to the sterile filtered media. Don't add the cells before you filter it, right? If you add the cells before you filter it, you're going to filter out all your cells. That's not good. So you want to add the cells after you filter it. Remember that. After you filter it, add the cells, right? So just take your 1 ml pipette that you added the trypsin with and suck up all these cells. Now generally when you're adding cells to something, you want to do at least a 5-fold dilution, right? So you want to do 1 ml to at least 5 ml. So I'm just going to add my cells in there. And then I'm going to mix it a little bit. Just get the cells mixed all around in there. And you should see little particulates in there, a bunch of little cells floating around. There we go. Okay. Now, next thing we're going to do is we're going to use the plate. So as always with everything, you want to label the plate, label what's in it, label the date you created it, label with what media is in it. We want to be clean on this. So what you're probably going to want to do is you're probably going to want to clean your gloves and clean your pipette again, just to make sure that everything is clean. So clean that gloves and pipette. Get everything nice and clean. We're going to be using the pipette to interact with the media a lot. We are going to interact with the media a lot ourselves, and we don't want to contaminate it because that would stink. Just get a little cleanup in there. All right. So now what we're going to do, let's shift the view on this down here. All right. So we want to do two things. One, we are going to want to pipette let's see how much. So we want to use 5 mLs for the T25 flask and 10 mLs for the 12 wells. So we're going to do 800 microliters per well, and the rest of it we're going to dump in the T25 flask. Right? That makes sense? So let's set this at 800. Grab a pipette tip. And now, you generally don't want to set the lid of this down on anything. You don't want to set it down on the table as much as possible. Generally, what I like to do is I just like to prop it up a little bit. Just something like that. So it's just part of it touches the table a little bit. Next thing we're going to do is, try not to breathe on all this stuff that you're doing. Keep back a little bit. Hold your breath if you have to. Start pipetting this solution into each of the wells. Now, if your pipette tip ever touches anything, if it touches the outside of the tube, if it touches the plate, if it touches anything, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to change it. You got a lot of pipette tips, don't be stingy, Change it as much as you need it. Alright, I got that. Put the lid on. What we're going to do is just swirl it a little bit. Make sure the whole bottom of the plates are covered. Each well is covered. So you want to make sure each well is covered. You should have the bottom be completely covered. Right, just like that. So then we got our plate. So the next thing you're going to want to do, I don't have a flask up here with me, but you're going to want to take the remainder of your cells, mix with the L15, and you're going to want to dump this into a flask, into a T25 flask. Try to be, again, as sterile as possible. That's always a given, but try to be as sterile as possible. Dump into another flask, and you should start another flask culture. So you should have 2 flask cultures. I always try to keep 2 flask cultures going at all times, just in case one of them dies, gets contaminated, or something like that. If you have a plate, that also can count. Each well in a plate has, only a little bit less cells than one of these 12.5 centimeter flasks. So generally each well of the plate has a pretty good number of cells in it. So if you have a plate going and the cells are attached, that's good news. But you want to also have a flask just in case, right? You always want to have a backup. Yeah, 800 microliters per well. That just makes it easier, so you only have to use one 15 ml tube. You could obviously do more. You probably don't want to do too much less. But yeah, 800 microliters just makes it so you can use one 15 ml tube for your plate and for your T25 flask. So you don't have to use 2 15 ml culture medias. All right. So after you do all that, after you got your cultures, stick them, at 37 degrees, as close as you can to 37 degrees. Remember your plate, if you don't have any Tupperware or anything like that to help protect it from the surrounding air that's blowing, what you want to do is you want to wrap it in some aluminum foil or something, saran wrap, whatever. Just wrap it in something, help protect it from the air. Protect these things, take care of them. They should be good. Now, once you start your cultures, you don't really want to look at them more than once a day, because every time you pick them up and move them around and slosh it around, it's going to dislodge cells and stuff like that. So try to look at them, once, maybe twice a day, but generally just once a day at the most. So after one day with this media, you should start to see cells attach, but generally you're not going to see a lot of cells adherent and growing till like 2, 3, 4, 5 days. It's okay. Like I said, be patient with these things. Don't try to rush anything. It's okay if things take long to grow. Remember, all this class is recorded, so you can do it on your own time. Make sure you don't do it hurried or in a rush. That's just going to mess things up. Be patient with these cells. Take care of these cells, and they will treat you with respect because everything builds on each other. So after this, what we're going to do next week is we're going to do antibiotic selection. I'm going to teach you how to screen using antibiotics to find the proper antibiotic concentration, so that you could do some genetic engineering. And then the final week, we're actually going to try to do genetic engineering, which takes a little while. It might go beyond the length of the class, but that's okay. It's okay if you go beyond this class. I'll still be around. I'll be here to answer your questions. Don't feel like that once the class ends, you're just left to your own devices. This is a shorter class. We're trying to get it done before the holidays, before Thanksgiving and stuff like that. So, but you can, as long as your cells are growing, as long as you're taking care of your cells, you can start it and do it whenever you're ready. And if you need extra cells, if your cells have died, contact us and we'll ship some more out. But, do your best to keep them alive, right? It's a good practice. Because if you order the cells from a regular company, they're not going to send you more cells when your cells die, right? Or get contaminated. They're going to have you pay for them. So do your best to keep them alive. All right. Any questions about anything we went over today? It's pretty simple. It's mostly, again, just being sterile. Sterile filtering your media. You don't have to sterile filter the trypsin. Don't worry about that. Trypsin is generally pretty good at killing stuff. So I don't sterile filter my trypsin, but we'll add the L15 media on the website. But if you sign up for the class and you need more L15 media, just let us know, and we'll ship some out if it's contaminated or something. If you just want more in general, then you just pay the cost of shipping. Don't reuse the filters or the syringes. Once you've finished using them, just toss them out. Just if you need more syringes and filters, let us know. But you should have plenty for this class. You should have plenty of everything. If things like I said, if things get contaminated, we could send you more. But you should have plenty of materials where you shouldn't have to reuse anything. So once you trypsin digest your flasks, throw your flasks out. Right? Don't try to reuse your flasks. Don't try to reuse your syringes and filters. Don't try to reuse your 15 ml and 50 ml tubes. Just throw them out. These things are pretty inexpensive, and we can get you more. Any other questions that relate to this class? If you have questions that aren't related to this class, there's other times we could chat. And you can always try to email us or contact us on social media. Obviously, we don't always have the time to answer every question, but we'll do our best, especially if it pertains to our business. So if you're asking a question about a product or something like that, we'll do our best to respond. But otherwise, these classes are generally just for asking questions about the classes. So if there's no more questions about this stuff this week, remember, if you have questions, post in the Google Classroom. If you have questions about your media and what it looks like, take pictures, post in the Google Classroom, right? It's going to be hard for me to make a judgment without actually seeing anything. And try to take multiple magnifications. So do like a 4 and a 20 or something. Don't just send me one magnification, because sometimes that can make it difficult. Also, if you think your flask is contaminated, just send me a picture of the whole flask also. Not just under the microscope. No problem, Leslie. I try to do my best, but I'm really busy, so sorry if I can't answer everything for everybody. All right. If there's no more questions, then we will meet again next week. Let your cells grow. Take care of them. Don't do anything crazy to them. Let them grow till next week. And next week we'll start some experiments. If anything gets contaminated or fails, just repeat the experiment and do it again. We gave you a bunch extra supplies, so you shouldn't really be limited by supplies. So yeah, hopefully everybody gets their stuff this week, and you'll have some growing cells next week. I will see you all next week, and until then, take care of those cells.